All right, and welcome to a very impromptu stream. I certainly was not intending to do a live stream today, as I don't usually stay completely up to snuff on current events, but I had a spare hour, and there was big news today that, in fact, Alex Jones and InfoWars were simultaneously banned by Facebook, Apple, Spotify, and I believe another service. Was also Twitter? Does someone have a confirmation on this?
They're still on Twitter for now.
And YouTube, I should say. Mm-hmm. And YouTube as well. So what we're talking about is the people from InfoWars woke up today and basically had their entire business model smashed at the behest of, well, who knows, right? Certainly not one corporate board, but it seems to be simultaneously all four of the major social media companies. So this is huge news. I don't think people who originally saw this kind of completely conceptualized what was going on. I don't think it would have been huge news if Apple had done it. I don't think it would have been huge news if Facebook had gotten rid of them. But this sort of simultaneous coordinated banning is what is the huge problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, how is this arrived at? I mean, they must all be sitting in a room actually making these business decisions together. And this seems to run afoul of everything that we would hope to see from, well, antitrust legislation or antitrust principles, at least.
No. Progressivism is now totally pro-corporate. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, every piece of media was portraying large corporations as the evil right-wing bad guys, and even, Iraq war, military-industrial complex. But firmly now, conveniently, just as the progressive left doesn't really care much about class anymore, they are now, it seems like, totally pro-corporate, but it seems like something they don't want to freely admit, because it obviously benefits them to no end, having control. And specifically, the types of corporations that they own are media and information.
This is something obviously that's being, I saw a few clips from CNN on my bus ride home from work, and this is something that's being quite heavily supported by CNN and the other mainstream media sources. I just don't know. I mean, I think we all knew that something like this was coming, but the fact that you could have a coordinated banning of something that was so large seems to me to be a real wake-up call.
Yeah, because, I mean, there's been plenty of people that, even bigger than Alex Jones, that have just been banned from certain platforms for no reason, like Britain First, which had over 1 million likes on Facebook, got banned. I think like James Alsop, Tommy Robinson, all have been banned from Twitter. But like the coordinated effort, that's what's really disturbing. It's because like they're definitely talking to each other, and they definitely decided we want Alex Jones off all of our platforms, and that's where that's what's really disturbing.
I can see someone said, "How do you know they were coordinated?" I mean, okay, so they just all accidentally decided to ban Alex Jones today.
It's possible, but I am very skeptical.
It reminds me sort of what sort of kicked off Gamergate, where you had multiple gaming journalism sites publishing pretty much the same article all within like a week of each other.
Exactly.
We know these organizations coordinate. That's that's beyond a doubt. The question is what? I mean, the question is why. I mean, this is sort of the thing. I mean, recently, I need to. It's hard to know whether I want to take this in the InfoWars direction or whether I want to take this into the social media direction. But the question about what social media actually is, obviously, if this were something smaller, you wouldn't be surprised if companies coordinated safety regulations, and I'm sure that's going to be their defense. But recently, there was a ruling that came out of one of the lower courts that said that the president of the United States didn't even have the right to ban somebody on Twitter because access to social media was critical to participating in the public square, which seems to run totally contrary to this idea that the social media space is some kind of private, personal, free speech platform of Mark Zuckerberg or any of the other corporate CEOs who run these.
The ruling was that Trump was not allowed to block people on Twitter. He wasn't kicking people off Twitter. He was just blocking journalists.
I understand. Yeah, he wasn't able to.
No. The point being that on the one hand, they're saying you have to treat it as like it is a platform of that it would be protected by free speech in the public. Yet at the same time, when they do this, it's always defended as, well, they're private corporations, they can do whatever they want.
If Trump does not have the ability to ban somebody on his own social media, then we've agreed that social media is no longer some kind of private piece of property that's only constrained by the terms of service provided by the corporate entity and agreed upon by the end user. I don't see any way around that.
And furthermore, these corporate the argument that these corporations are allowed to do what they want because they're not the government follows here, because there's really no genuine alternative to something like YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. There's no real genuine peer competitors for these sites. They have become effectually monopolies.
I mean, at the same time, think about this as like the consolidation of media is continuing. I mean, I think with the acquisition of Fox, does that basically mean Disney owns half the media at this point? I mean, it must be something. They must own almost half of all the media we consume in some form.
A not insubstantial percentage of the media.
Yeah, because
substantial. It's I don't know if it's half, but it's controlling. Like if Disney sets a policy on what sorts of media they personally would put out, that will affect the total market, the media market, in a very large way that even other companies will then follow in lockstep form from.
I mean, at some point, potentially, they could just start making certain demands or doing almost things we would probably think insane 20 years ago with that amount of power over the media. Like, imagine this, like they could threaten to shut down, or imagine them just saying, we're just not gonna, have any, if they own any news sites, I'm just thinking, they could pretty much dictate any, or go ahead. I was rambling for a minute.
It's obvious that these attempts at restricting people are not isolated. They're not the isolated desires of these corporate CEOs. They're part of a specific set of opinions that broadly correlates with the Democratic Party and aligns itself with major media organizations like CNN and other cable news organizations. This is the status quo in action. and right now, I mean, they're just demonstrating that they don't have an ability to be controlled. And for people who might be wondering why I'm worried about this, is that I think people remember, I think I mentioned this before in a live stream, about a year ago, Lauren Southern was kicked off of Patreon. Now, Lauren Southern was kicked off of Patreon because she participated in a political stunt that I think was put on by Generation Identitaire in Europe, where they took a little dinghy out and drove it in front of to put it bluntly, a human trafficking boat that was picking up immigrants off the coast of Africa and shipping them into Europe. And she fired a flare across its bow. And so Patreon took her off of their platform because they used the sort of tried and true progressive safety claim that progressives have been using against anti-abortion protesters for the last 30 years, that, well, free speech is one thing, but you can't literally be standing in front of people in medical care. And so it was conceivable, although still incredibly dishonest, that maybe Lauren Southern had crossed some kind of a line. And that's why she got taken off of Patreon. At this point, a year later, Patreon goes after Faith Goldy and PayPal goes after Faith Goldy with absolutely no pretense. The fact that she said the 14 words from that infamous quote in quotations and said it wasn't that bad to say. That was enough to get her kicked off of all of her payment sites, and no advanced explanation was required. They just did it. So this exercise with InfoWars is a dry test for further bans. The other ones will not be as dramatic or as announced, and they'll eventually, this is essentially what we're witnessing as a pilot. And I guess, I guess the solution is yet to be forthcoming, because we have not been able to come up with good counter solutions to PayPal and Patreon. And I'm not so sure that we have right now a good solution to a good alternative to Facebook or YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely with the Faith Goldie one, though, that one was just them wanting to get her off the platforms. I mean, with the Lauren Southern one, it was debatable whether or not she had crossed the line. But with the Faith Goldie one, it was 100% them just wanting her off, her off those.
They just didn't like the opinion, right?
Yes, exactly.
They actually tried to go to legal precedent for Lauren Southern, even though I think that is highly questionable. But they didn't even try with Faith Goldie. They're just like, well, I don't like your opinions. You're gone. Boom.
All right.
And then it's because they had tested this with Lauren Southern, and when they didn't get a pushback, they decided that they could just keep on pushing the envelope. I mean, Faith Goldie is a lot less popular than Lauren Southern, so she's probably going to have a lot less people come to her defense.
And they did the same thing with Jared Taylor. They just flat out banned their Twitter account from, which I think had over like 60,000 followers, the American Renaissance Twitter account and Jared Taylor's personal account on Twitter were just flat out banned. And he actually sued them. And I believe that he actually got a ruling in his favor.
Yes, he won his court case, and I think Twitter is appealing it. But for now,
with the exception of that, because I think when it comes to the backlash, it's not just so much. At least I think is there going to be backlash? It's the fact that what are they going to do? You're going to have Sargon or any of the rest of the pro-free speech people on YouTube say, well, this is bad, this isn't fair, this is against freedom of speech. And guess what? Essentially, all the big media outlets have the license to do now, or they figure out, well, oh, you're saying we're banning free speech, now you're banned.
The most.
I mean, that is what's gonna. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead. The most difficult one we're currently seeing is the financial sites, because unfortunately, these financial sites rely on API developers that in turn have to make arrangements with credit card companies and with large banks. And so what's happened in terms of this whole PayPal thing is PayPal bans somebody, and then they try to sign up to Maker support. And then everyone signs up to give them money in Maker support, and then come the end of the month, the Maker support can't pay. And the reason why it can't pay is because Stripe, the company that develops the API that links Visa and MasterCard and your bank with an interface that you can pay online, has decided to pull its support from the people who are trying to create alternative platforms because they are currently funding people on the right. And if you're trying to find your way out of that, that is a very difficult maze. You basically have to reinvent a core technology of the internet from the ground up in order to get around that service. Now, I'm not so sure that all APIs have necessarily left or have participated in this, but this is a huge barrier. And I feel that a lot of people who participate in this, they're not being very, they don't understand. Like I was listening to Jeremy from The Quartering, and he was just brutal on Maker support because he didn't get his paycheck. But he didn't understand that it wasn't their fault. He didn't understand that there was this larger boycott in effect that he was essentially just catching the back end of. And I don't know. It's not. I think people need to be thinking a little bit more in the long term here.
Is this that surprising though overall? I mean, are we particularly shocked that we're being silenced for voicing our opposition to the dominant religion of our culture?
It's that the shock is that all for like 5 platforms banned Alex Jones in one single day is the surprising part. If it would have just been one platform, if it's just Apple or it's just YouTube that banned Alex, no, it wouldn't be surprising at all. We've seen people with much larger name, with much more subscribers than Alex Jones receive this kind of treatment from similar platforms. But that it happened to a channel this big from all 5 platforms in a single day that's where there seems to be a huge milestone that we've reached in terms of censorship from these social liberal progressive oligarchs.
Yeah, another thing to point out though is that Alex Jones also, Infowars was one of the sites that actually had promoted Trump the most. And even though I'm not a fan of Infowars, it is true that like the midterms are coming up, and that a lot of Trump support was gained through Infowars. And I mean, it seems like it's awfully convenient that like only a few months before there's an election, one of the biggest channel, like one of the, I guess you could say, biggest alternative channels that is on the right, even though, in my opinion, it's not a very high quality channel, it just gets outright banned from all these platforms. I mean, they had to have known that, like, where what effect InfoWars was actually having, and it's pretty clear they kind of want to push it in a certain direction.
If I were to fathom, I would guess that this is revenge for them breaking the Hillary health issues in the summer of 2016. Mm-hmm. If you remember exactly 2 years ago, InfoWars broke. And this is what really made, I know people don't like it. Imagine my shock, Paul Joseph Watson.
Yeah.
It made his career because they broke the fact that Hillary had major health issues going into the election. And none of the mainstream media would cover it. And InfoWars did. And people who are, I don't like Alex Jones, and not many people do, but Frame Game Radio pointed out that this was a fact that was relevant to the campaign. All the media organizations were essentially covering for Hillary, and InfoWars essentially broke the story.
Another thing I'd like to point out, and I may be I may be incorrect on this, but according to Alex Jones, he's the only one that's self-funded or funded by support. So whereas like Ben Shapiro supposedly has some billionaire backers, and I can't think of what other conservative alternative media. And
Fox News.
Yeah. Well,
Ben Shapiro and CRTV generally are funded by oil money,
but not Alex Jones, right? So not only he truly, as cringy as he is, he actually is an independent voice compared to even somebody like Ben Shapiro.
You know what's interesting? I just think it might be important to note is like it almost seems like this. By doing this, they sort of proved they gave some evidence or credence to Alex Jones' claims of like that, like all the elite are actually colluding together. I mean, it's not that much of a stretch, but it almost seems like, well, he's now been proven right because Zuckerberg and the rest of the reptilian gang. It seems like they must have had to actually have a direct collusion to shut it all down at the same time.
We've got some collusion with our elections.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but this is, I mean, it's sort of ironic, but do you remember what big scandal for the mainstream media this scandal displaced only 3 hours ago?
Oh, is it something about the Trump investigation again?
No, it was, well, I don't know. In my Twitter feed, at least, it was the whole Sarah Jeong thing.
The what?
The whole Sarah Jeong thing from the New York Times. The whole
yes,
the reporter
that
who was like
that is quite convenient.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, I don't know how convenient it is. It's ironic, certainly, because you've gone.
You don't know what that is.
Oh, so she was the New York Times essentially hired an editor who was really regularly treating things. Hold on, who was really regularly treating incredibly racist things against white people, like white people are pale-skinned goblins that should live underground and we're replacing you, and just your standard run-of-the-mill anti-white SJW claptrap. But when they pointed out that this person had this record that went all the way back to 2013 tweeting these things, the New York Times were just like, oh, shrug, whatever, it was a joke, well, she's part of our editorial board now. And yeah, and so now we come right off of those tweets not really mattering to, well, Alex Jones can't even have a platform, an alternative kooky aluminum foil platform supported by what at this point we've agreed to is an open public square.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is,
and it gets better because the reason all of these platforms ditched him was hate speech, right?
Yeah, exactly, right.
That was that. Okay, I see now why you say it's.
So hate speech is so talking about the Bilderbergers or whatever crazy idea Alex Jones has is hate speech, but going like white people are goblins, whatever, that's a joke, or that's part of the performance of being on Twitter. I mean, this is the standard because hate speech is whatever the left needs it to be in any given time to advance their cause. There's no consistent definition, and everyone knows this. I invited some people on Twitter on the left to come in and discuss this, but I haven't had any takers, and the main accusation was that they didn't that he was using hate speech, but they couldn't define it as usual.
if you've
they'll
actually
probably
paid
just chalk it up to coded anti-Semitism. I mean, they'll just say that Alex Jones has accused some Jewish individuals of drinking blood, even though he's accused Gentiles of the same thing. He just he basically accuses them of being satanic and drinking blood. But they'll just say he's basically pulling the whole blood libel thing, and they'll just chalk it up to anti-Semitism, basically.
Oh, Distribus, you got a super chat.
Yeah, hold on. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that whole like I've watched a few Alex Jones videos, and I've watched a few Alex Jones highlights videos, and I can quite honestly say he said nothing that a normal everyday conservative would find extremely objectionable, at least in that regard. He may have said some crazy things that they would find objectionable on a factual basis, but I don't think he's ever said anything really that's like racially insensitive, or that anybody would consider racially insensitive. So I mean, it's just sort of mind-boggling that that's sort of the cover they've chosen, and I find it funny too, because at this point the assertion that hate speech is just what?
Yeah, talking to people on the left, they literally think Alex Jones is responsible for the Sandy Hook massacre and gun deaths all over the place. And I think there was wasn't there even somebody who I forget, wasn't there something where somebody was shot at a place because he was
instigating the guy who shot at that pizza place?
Oh yeah, the Pizzagate thing, right?
Yeah, the Pizzagate thing.
Alex Jones literally shot my dog.
Anyway, to finish,
I think the controversy with Alex Jones for the Sandy Hook note, the controversy was that he had said that it was a conspiracy theory, and apparently that his coverage of it, like coverage, something you might want to put in quotes, it apparently led to harassment of the families of the victims, which I mean, it's
not only that.
"quote unquote" harassment,
but it led to the building being shot at, and it led to the family of I forgot what his name was. It was the dude who was murdered at some point. The accusation was that he knew something about the Pizzagate and he was going to spill, but then they murdered him. And this
I mean, the same thing. The same thing though is that I mean, one thing you'll see the left always do is that they'll blame people on the right for their alleged fans harassing people. Like if you remember after the Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson interview, apparently Kathy Newman got so-called death threats, but I mean, like Jordan Peterson gets death threats every day. But the mainstream media went on and on about Kathy Newman getting death threats. But then when it's the flip side, they never associate it with the public figures. Well, exactly.
I mean, like if they had a consistent standard, because a lot of mainstream media basically ran pieces labeling Jordan Peterson as a Nazi, quote unquote. Wouldn't they be responsible for the death threats that Jordan Peterson receives?
No, because they don't have to. Who's going to hold them accountable?
Well, yes, that's exactly my point.
Anyway, I will read the super chat from the Beast for $9.99. Thank you very much for that. That's very generous. He says, "Thanks for a timely and topical stream. Could this energize voters for midterms when taken in combination with Sarah Young?"
It's doubtful.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think about
what person cares about those two things who isn't already voting on the right end of the spectrum?
Yeah. I think
one thing I will say is that Trump could perhaps get some political hay out of this if he pushes something like an internet bill of rights or declares social media companies to be neutral public spaces and not essentially outside the purview of the First Amendment and determining who they ban and who they don't.
Or Donald Trump.
Do it. He's been on Alex Jones' podcast before, so it's not like Trump has never heard of Alex Jones either.
Imagine if Donald Trump just buys Facebook.
I don't think he has the money. Mark Zuckerberg,
he will,
and there's no way Zuckerberg would ever let him.
There's no hostile takeover. But I don't know. I mean, I'll also say this: There's another thing that creates this sort of auspicious context to this banning, and that is the huge, enormous dive that Facebook took last weekend at stock.
Yeah.
See, no one remembers that, right? We've all forgotten that. But there was a
Facebook didn't
huge
forget
crash in the social media stock last week.
Yeah,
on
Twitter
Facebook.
and Facebook crashed, and I was happy about it. But
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
I think
it
that might
was
have
a
something to
moment
do
of
with that, too.
catharsis.
Is there a reason why?
I mean,
Not really. No, there wasn't a concrete reason.
Companies are largely based on speculation because they don't really turn a profit. For instance, Amazon doesn't turn a profit either, and it's the most. It has very, very high stock value because of the fact that they capture a larger and larger share of the market that they're eventually expected to deliver just huge amounts of money. And if the investors feel like that's never going to happen, then the stock price can drop really, really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, just generally to add on to that, most of the stock market nowadays is speculation, but with social media companies, it's more so, or just generally tech companies, it's more so just because people don't know what to expect out of tech companies.
You know, I hope one thing that comes out of this though is kind of just the complete hypocrisy that the mainstream media is really showing now. Like, if you remember a few weeks ago when Trump visited the United Kingdom, they went on and on about this stupid Trump balloon that, like, you know, it was on every single media thing, even though it was not nearly as big as they said it would be. And then Sadiq Khan, the same guy that's advocating for people being arrested for social media posts, says we respect our tradition of free speech. I mean, just like the amount of hypocrisy coming out of these guys is just dripping.
I almost think at this point is they either they know it and they're basically being more and more bold about it because they know that they can get away with it, or they just genuinely do not care. To them, it's not hypocrisy. It's the other side. The right is pure evil, and it's completely licit to do whatever to use whatever rules and tactics you want in order to ideologically defeat your opponents. This is the problem that I think people that are still advocating for liberalism have, is this sort of assumption that, you know, we're supposed to abide by these basic set of ideological neutrality rules. Like, we're going, you know, like the rules of a civic debate, like, you know, you can't be hypocritical or you lose points in a debate or something like that, where in reality the left has for decades understood they don't, considering the amount of power over words and over communication they have, they don't need to play fair, and yet the right still insists on it.
Well, yeah.
I want to ask a different question.
Yes, go ahead.
This is the difficulty, and I just put succinctly, who is the audience for this new hypocrisy?
Well, I hope that it's the normies, because I mean,
that's the good question, right? Because I'm not so sure how many normies. There's a certain diminishing returns with this stuff, right? I'm not so sure that there are many people who aren't politically active who aren't aware of the fact that things like what Sarah Young said are commonplace in academia and in the circles of mainstream media when the cameras aren't on them or the microphones are off.
And again,
I'm not so sure if there's anybody who really is interested in becoming politically active who does not understand that the mainstream has a really bad problem with bias and is really depressing the scales with their fingers.
And
also, just generally, most people who aren't politically active are completely unaware of hypocrisy, as far as I can tell.
And this is what I was going to say, is like, they're once again another blow to, I think, the people that are trying to still rely on sort of the silent majority, or, you know, our understanding of Western liberalism in the post-World War II is the idea, well, the people will just wake up, or, you know, at some point. And the thing is, it's just not happening.
Ideas.
Yeah, the thing is, what happens is people aren't really, you know, hierarchy and leadership is actually important. That people, the, you know, masses will follow some form of elites. That's really just how human societies work. It doesn't work where, you know, there's like a common will of the people that just forms completely naturally without any sort of leadership.
It's also, there's no way to go forward. I mean, so the average person gets upset about the censorship.
I'd like to also point out that
Guys,
that
please try to not interrupt each other. I know everyone wants to get in, but let's try to.
Can't be like Gallus engineer. I know.
Well, I know. I know. Let's just try to let people finish their sentences before we cut in. So, just wanted to say.
okay.
And don't whip out your ukuleles.
All right. How about Granger? You finish, and then I'll go.
Okay. Well, thank you. The only the problem with saying that I don't think it's so much that people just follow elites. I think it's that the elites in our culture have done a good job of taking away any meaningful way of resisting. They get an election they don't like, and they just throw out the results. So, I mean, the silent majority. It's not that the silent majority doesn't exist in a lot of cases. It's that they don't have a voice.
I'd like to actually point out that on the subject of hypocrisy, I remember a quote that Distributist, if I may paraphrase, he said that any amount of contradictions can be smoothed over by enough money. And our opponents have a lot of money to throw around.
Yes.
So it doesn't really matter how many contradictions or hypocrisies they commit, because they feel like they have enough money and power to go around, and money can hide any amount of contradictions.
Yeah.
At this point, they are the government corporate alliance. They are the military industrial complex to the left.
Yeah, I mean they don't
need to answer to anyone. They don't need to. There was a article from the Federalist, and the Federalist, this was in light of the Sarah Young thing, and it said the New York Times must demonstrate how its standard is actually justified. Its double standard on racism is actually justified. And I'm like, it must. Who do they have? They don't have to answer these questions. And
Jesus.
People have been pointing this about Jordan Peterson too. He keeps on saying, "Its idea of race is incoherent. Its idea of free speech is incoherent. Its idea of hate speech is incoherent." They're never going to be able to answer all of these questions that come up when you make distinctions like this. I mean, they don't have to.
Yeah,
they
it's
don't
like,
have to answer.
who's going to ask it? The bigger problem is like who's asking them the questions.
No,
People that they think are
question.
Nazis. Yeah, people they think are Nazis.
People that have no power.
Well, they don't feel morally obligated to answer to quote unquote Nazis.
Yeah.
So in short, leftist hypocrisy is an icebreaker. It's I don't know, a pink pill, not even a red pill.
The problem is I'm not so sure what the audience for this hypocrisy is. That's the question that concerns me.
Well, I meant more like when you're talking to somebody, if they're like, okay, so why do you complain about fake news, or why are you a conservative? And then you like maybe give one or two examples, but writing a book about it isn't worthwhile.
I'm not so sure I follow.
Oh, just that you could explain it. You could point. Hypocrisy resonates with people. They sense it's unfair. I think even you use that as you're resisting. That was the fulcrum you were using in resisting progressive institutions.
Mm-hmm.
If you point out hypocrisy, you could leverage people who were in the center or even against you. So in like real limited doses, like when you're one-on-one with a person, or if you have in a small audiences, you can bring this up. It's just the problem is conservative Inc. media has made this like the hallmark of their existence, and it's never gone anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one problem that a lot of people run into, and I've had this debate with several of the classical liberals and several other people, it's that there seems to be an insistence on fairness, and they seem to think that if you actually point out the unfairness, then you're going to have the moral high ground. But I think that the truth is that the left is partisan. They're completely partisan, and they have no interest in being fair. And I think the response really is you kind of have to be partisan yourself, because if you have these principles that you're willing to apply to your opponents, but they're not willing to apply them to you, well, I mean, you're kind of just setting yourself up for failure in most cases.
I'd say the problem with that cartoon, isn't it? that the with the Islamists about to cut someone's head off, and like, that's not very liberal.
Oh, yeah,
It's like they're about to ban us, and you're gonna say, oh, that's not liberal. You banning me from it's all, okay, ban.
I mean, this is the thing is that the problem with that of just sort of saying, you sort of have to be partisan yourself. I think that insistence on fairness is if conservatives and classical liberals, who are basically the same person or same thing, that's a foundation of classical liberalism, and essentially to reject that is to reject that actual the entire idea of liberalism itself in the first place. So it kills their own belief system, even though it's very evident now that just holding to those beliefs about fairness is not going to do anything because the other side doesn't care. It's like one of the things of game theory that two countries are arming up for war and they want to agree to a peace treaty, and so they're going to both agree to scale back their military forces a substantial amount. Now how it works in game theory is neither side really does it because they're both equally afraid that the other side isn't going to either. And yet the same thing, if you look at it in the same way as, like, say, the right and the left in America, in the West for the past couple decades, is they both are supposed to say we have an agreement that we won't through liberal tradition that we won't arm up against each other, as it were. Yet the left is now basically like pointing huge numbers of nuclear weapons at the right and occasionally firing them at them. And the right is still trying to insist, well, no, our peace treaty we still have this peace treaty that I signed and you signed a while ago that says we won't try and harm each other. It's like a peace treaty only means anything if both sides are actually agreeing to it. And very clearly the left is not.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's the criminal's dilemma, and they've already decided to not cooperate, really. Because the thing is, they have no incentive to to really play by these rules. Because, I mean, what do these companies really gain by allowing Alex Jones on their platform? They really kind of don't. I mean, they gain, like, I guess, revenue from the advertisement and stuff like that. But I mean, just one thing is that you'll notice that if they don't really have anything to gain, they'll happily ban someone that they don't like their politics.
I'd like to. Okay, how about you, Fritz, first?
Oh no, you can go ahead.
Oh well, I just was going to spin off of that into something very interesting that does anybody remember the James Gunn and Dan Harmon controversy?
Well, yeah, that happened like 2 weeks ago.
Yes, yes. But considering our current,
we're talking about these things like they happened like years ago. They happened like 20 days ago.
I know. It's the state of the world, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But I'm immediately thinking of how people like Mike Cernovich and James Polbasak and Ali Alexander went after James Gunn and the James Gunn for putting pro-pedo material on his Twitter account, and that got him fired from Disney. And you had all these different people like Reason Magazine, David French, Ben Shapiro. They all defended James Gunn, saying that, oh, well, we shouldn't start the precedent that we should let the outrage mob just dictate speech, when these same people were all for Roseanne Barr getting fired for her one quote unquote racist joke.
And this is why the libertarian principle is facile. I mean, it's not like it's wrong necessarily. It's just totally immaterial to the world we live in right now. We're not arguing over whether people have the right to run media organizations a certain way. What we're talking about is the rules that actually set up guidelines for how people discuss things in the public square. And unless we can actually get consistent rules applied in that way, all we're doing, these people from National Review and Reason Magazine, well, there's absolutely nothing interesting to say.
Just as critical.
Reason hasn't written interesting things since 2008, and that's because the questions they're asking aren't the correct ones. I don't care that Mark Zuckerberg has the right to do what he wants with his company. I care that there's a public square that we can participate and exchange ideas in, and that's obvious that we don't have that.
Well, yeah, I would, but the point I was trying to make is that they were all for the outrage mob. These so-called right-wingers were for the outrage mob going after Roseanne Barr because it was a left-wing outrage mob. But when a bunch of quote-unquote right-wingers go after James Gunn's pedo stuff, they were all of a sudden against companies firing employees.
Well, it's because they're afraid of the accusation of racism. They're afraid. The left has been able to make good on its threats in a much more expansive way. The left has been able to get people fired not just for being racist, but for defending people who said things that were racist. And that's the reason why people fear their lynch mobs more than they do the ones on the right.
I mean,
that's a huge black pill. You know, you can get away with pedo stuff more. It's easier to get away with pro-pedo stuff than it is to get away with quote-unquote racist stuff. Man, that's a super huge black pill.
I mean, anybody that has heard of Rothbard should know that.
Well, I don't know if it really has anything to do with the pedo-ness or whatever. It has to do with the fact that the left has the educational and media establishment, and they can make charges and reputation harm more permanent to people than the right wing can. The right wing can summon a few flash mobs here and there, but all in all, their ability to make a lasting impact on a person's reputation is fairly minimal. So whether it's pedophilia, whether it's pedophilia or whether it's racism or whatnot, it doesn't really matter. The people who are the left's enemies will always have to fear about this more. And this is the game that we're playing, and we've lost it already. And I think this is one of the reasons why the people from Reason Magazine, they have nothing to say that's interesting on this. They have nothing to say that's interesting. It's just basically a explanation about why this has happened and why we're in the miserable state that we're in. Nothing interesting has ever come out of this. And I really don't think that they're even part of this conversation. And I increasingly wonder if the Federalist is. Yeah, if the mainstream people in National Review are, because they don't seem to understand what's going on here.
All right. So
I'm not hearing Buckley, but to segue the topic, I think since we're at the halfway mark, there are a number of things people have proposed doing. I don't think anyone's really figured out the financial side of social media yet, with Stripe being uncooperative. But people have talked about, on the governmental side, going for some kind of restrictive mechanism, an internet bill of rights to punish social media for doing this. And I think it might be something to look into.
Hasn't Ted Cruz floated the idea? I mean, Ted Cruz today came out and tweeted that even though he's not a fan of Alex Jones, he supports his right for free speech, and he has pursued it over Prager University, even though PragerU, it was only for them being demonetized. It wasn't for them being banned. Mm-hmm. The guy has gone after these companies before, so I think. I hope that he does something with Alex Jones, because I think he has a lot more ammo on this one than he would have with the PragerU one.
And go ahead.
Personally, I find the demonetizations much more harmful, let's say, than any than outright removal, right? If that makes any sense.
I think I get what you're saying. Is it because demonetization is much less visible to people, to like a person's viewers, than an outright banning, where you can say in a video, "Hey, I've been demonetized," but people are like, "Well, we can still see your videos."
It's subtle when they demonetize.
They don't care if you get paid as long as they get the product.
This is why Faith Goldie's removal from PayPal probably should have gotten the reaction that the InfoWars ban got today, but didn't. Because what it all comes down to is money. And what the right does not have is a way to continuously finance cultural and media voices that come from a radical perspective. And the left does. The left has the universities, the left has the mainstream institutional press, and it can hire a huge number of people whose job is to essentially participate in this battle and the right does not have a complementary amount of complementary voice in this regard.
It doesn't even seem
I mean,
capable
just
of.
to go back to what I was going to say about the reputation.
One at a time, guys. One at a time.
I think I was first. Sorry. I was going to say the right, at least from what I see, the mainstream conservatives, they don't even seem willing to do so because they're liberals. They are still, proponents of a lot of the same things that have led to progressivism in the first place. And, continuously say the Republican Party is being and will continue to be hijacked by the left. The fact that you have somebody like Guy Benson, flamboyant, open homosexual, touting himself as a conservative, even though he doesn't even though it literally says in his video, I believe in, moral relativism and the idea of social progress, he's still touted as a conservative. So, there has to be massive restructuring in the leadership and format of the right itself before any real change can happen.
I suppose the difficulty is that no one has really come up with a banner that isn't fundamentally liberal, at least not in this country. And so I'm not so sure. I guess, could you convince a liberal that radical restructuring of the system is necessary? I guess liberals have been historically not very amenable to that argument inside America, at least. But yeah. I don't know. I mean, the difficulty, of course, is that and I sort of agree that liberalism is this false god, but I don't know if its presence is necessarily the problem because of the fact that we don't really have an ideology to replace it with. Right. And so, at least in the context of America, all of the arguments are going to be appeals to liberalism at the end of the day.
And again, I think that's still a problem because of the fact that it's part of the problem still with progressivism, that it's something that's been able to be fueled by liberalism in the first place. And I think that, sort of like the Chesterton quote where he describes, the world is divided between progressives and conservatives. I just replace conservatives with liberals, where the progressives' job is to make mistakes and the conservative is to prevent them from being corrected. And I think the same way the way that the American conservative movement is structured right now is to me at least, it's incapable of actually addressing any of these problems.
The difficulty, though, Fritz, and I sympathize. Like I said, this is true historically, and it points to the fact that we need to develop ideas that are outside of liberalism. But like in our present political environment, there is no angle that is not liberal. Okay, even the appeal to an Internet Bill of Rights, an Internet Bill of Rights is fundamentally liberal.
Yes,
right, and that's the biggest bat we have to hit Facebook with is the Internet Bill of Rights. It's an appeal to liberalism. The second we go like, oh hey, let's get rid of liberalism, like progressives will be like, okay, sure, like no free speech anymore. You're all banned.
Okay, I can see that.
Dictatorship of Mark Zuckerberg, like Prince Zuckerberg, like. No, thank you. No, this is one hell of a time to get rid of the principle of liberalism at the very time when there is essentially nothing to be gained from liberalism from the people farthest to the left. That's not to say that I defend liberalism as an absolute good or think that this has to somehow constrain or bound our intellectual exploration of ideas. In fact, I think if you're a radical reactionary or right-winger and you're not thinking out of the liberalist box, then you're not doing your job. But that being said, in the practical political reality we live in right now, the only thing that we can possibly contest them on this power play is liberalism.
All right, and I think I can agree with that. It's thinking of it as in the midterm, or we still have to appeal to American liberalism, I guess, yeah, you're right. In the longer term, though, I think the problems with liberalism have to be addressed. But right now,
problems with liberalism have to be addressed with a new idea. They cannot be. Unfortunately, liberalism is not something that can be replaced with a vacuum. The vacuum will only go to the left, and that's why. This is why and this is perhaps just not. I mean, this is a very, very interesting topic, and I'd love to have Fritz and perhaps a lot of other people, maybe Benedict the 17th, on to discuss this. But liberalism cannot be replaced by a vacuum. Actually, when liberalism is replaced by a vacuum, that has a name. It's called progressivism. It's called social justice. It's called the far left. It's called the anti-liberal left. If we want to actually address liberalism, it's going to have to be replaced with a positive idea. But for the time being, what we have right now is we have build alternative platforms or try to frequent them, and that's the difficult part, or try to launch some kind of pushback on the political sphere. And those, I don't know. Does anyone else have any?
One thing that you could do is, I think what people need to do is they need to write their either, if you're in the United States, write to representatives of the Republican Party. If you're in Canada, write to representatives of the Conservative Party. I think you need to get the message across that social media is going to be how they're going to win elections. This is how they're going to really grow support. And if it's being censored, they're a lot less likely to actually win any of these elections, because, I mean, for like Donald Trump, for example, he won the election through social media. The entire mainstream media was against him, even until he won the nomination. I don't think he was even very popular on conservative media, but it's social media that won it for Trump. And I think that if you can, a message that you do need to get across, I think, is that social media is the only way the right is going to win. And if you can get that across to local politicians, they might actually do something about it.
Well, the local politicians, just to clarify, Endeavor, do you mean like an Internet Bill of Rights or something like that?
Well, yeah, I'd say that preferably that would be something that I'd like to see come down the road. But I think just like writing to a politician and just telling them this, I think it's the least you can do.
I've got a question though. In the Internet Bill of Rights is something that at this stage I'm 100% on board with. Maybe there are some disadvantages that I haven't considered, and I'd love to hear them. But on the other end, on terms of finding alternatives, people have oftentimes talked about the difficulty of finding alternatives to Facebook and finding alternatives to PayPal and Patreon. But I wonder why no one has ever talked about an alternative to Facebook. Where is the social media that your grandmother can use? Is there any alternative to Facebook? For instance, I think I have deleted most of my Facebook accounts, and I intend to delete it writ large this afternoon if I have time. But
yeah,
I think then people are going to ask, where can I find photos of you? Where can I find, your family photo albums? Because people want to share that, right? Is there an alternative? Is there an alternative that actually stands that we trust? That we stand up for free speech? That
the thing is that all the ones that explicitly are in favor of free speech, those are all really small ones. So we have BitChute, we have Gab.com, and I'm
neither BitChute nor Gab are Facebook alternatives. Gab is a Twitter alternative, and BitChute is a YouTube alternative.
What's it called? That one, they've Minds.
That's a YouTube alternative, I thought.
Facebook-esque.
Well, when my grandmother liked to use Minds, it seems like
I don't know.
Mine seems to be like targeted at gamers who have like this point system and stuff. I'm talking about like I'm talking like for people who don't know this, I started a family this weekend. Big life events are coming, right? Like people want to have media where they get your family photo albums, right? Your non-anonymous front page.
I'd say Instagram is the one.
That's owned by Facebook.
Yeah, it's owned by Facebook.
Yeah, that Facebook does have a monopoly in the Facebook market.
Yeah, but I mean that's to me that's insane, right? To me that's insane.
But isn't Instagram kind of the same thing though?
But they own it. They own the same. Facebook owns Instagram.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, they do.
So
you can change emails.
They've horizontally expanded to cover pretty much all forms of non-anonymous social media sharing.
Yeah. Here's a question.
This is the big problem, though, with splitting up something like Facebook in that way, is because the big draw for sites like that is that everybody uses it, and that's the same thing with Twitter.
And moreover, the only reason why people actually invest in Facebook is they're perceived as a monopoly. They don't make very much. Their business model does not have a lot of money attached to it. But I wonder, why do social media companies need to have this huge profit margin? Why couldn't there be something more distributed, something more? Do they actually need that much?
That's what I'm thinking. I will say this. I would like to say this is like obviously I'm not proposing this as the alternative. Grandma should never use this, but 4chan essentially for years was just Christopher Poole running it out of his mom's house. He ran one of the biggest sites on the internet at the time, one of the most famous and infamous for years just one guy hosting the whole thing with volunteer moderators.
I mean, even today, Facebook has an has a dramatically small staff for a large corporation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible that we could do some kind of a non-profit social media service that's run on donations by a large dissident group of people who are just trying to get as many opinions out into the public marketplace as possible.
Well, no, it's not for opinions; it's for your grandmother.
Okay, well,
I think the model would have to be something along the lines of, this is a family location. We do not collect your data. We don't sell it. We work on donations only. You pay for a service where wholesome content is shared, where you can set up filters where only wholesome content is shared, and we do not sell your information to outside sources or do any other shenanigans that Mark Zuckerberg is doing with our data right now in order to make a profit and essentially, well, shore up a little bit of the drop he made last week.
Isn't there like a Christian Facebook that you're like perfectly describing that like no one uses, but it
I don't know.
It censors itself.
Facebook is like a horrible business model.
It does. Oh, there was one other website I wanted to float out there. The 4-H group that we're in, my family's in, band.com. I don't
MySpace.
Not MySpace. BAND.com. I don't know if it would work for what you're talking about, but it works kind of like Facebook. And I don't know, maybe it's not for people, maybe it's just for organizations, but a lot of people in our local community are using it instead of
well, unfortunately, this needs to be something that like people sort of I mean, essentially at this point, gab.ai, I mean, I'm going to create an account because I don't know. I mean, we need to start making it not just like the alt-right Twitter.
Right.
And the only reason, the only way it's going to be the non-alt-right Twitter is if people who aren't part of the alt-right start using it.
Here's another question I wanted to ask earlier. Is it kind of dovetails with what we're talking about. Is it possible that Facebook was the tower to heaven that was too high? I mean, like, the idea of wanting to share your photo album with your friends is a wonderful idea. But the idea that it needs to be out there for everyone in the world to be able to see a picture, or at least a profile picture of me, if they can type my name in, I mean, you
seem to underestimate how vapid and self-absorbed some people can be.
Well, now you're admitting that this thing is just encouraging vapid and self-absorbedness. I mean, the last thing we need.
That's another problem, the fact that social media encourages narcissism and panic mobs. So I'm not so sure it's the exact same problem of the leaders of that social media bending it to their political and avaricious aims.
But that was always going to happen. I mean...
Well, no, I know both of these things are problems. I don't see, at least right now, the connection between the two of them.
What I'm saying is maybe as we look for solutions, rather than look for Facebook that's perfectly politically neutral, why don't we think about trying to do the good things that we were doing on Facebook, like sharing photos with our friends and family, but we don't need it so we can reach across the whole world. If you want to try to connect with other people that are conservative or reactionary, you can go and set up a Facebook group and try to connect those people with anonymous profiles that way. But if you just want to talk to people in your town, you could create a meme group or something, a closed group
on Facebook.
But on Facebook, this is the thing. Like I'm not feeling incredibly secure about Facebook right now.
Well, you sign up with an anonymous profile.
I do have an anonymous profile on Facebook, but it does not protect me from their meddling, though. It protects my data from their meddling, but does not protect me from if I create a reactionary group on Facebook and it gets 1 million subscribers, Facebook might seriously consider shutting it down.
Right, but you got to look at it. You got to look at it like you're going into enemy territory every time you deal with it. You'd be like,
I understand that, but that's and I do, but that's that only goes so far, right?
Look at it. When the football players open the
cost of going on Facebook, you're not going to get anything out of it. The cost of going there and having the account shut down is greater than any sort of draw you would get going
Not
on.
If you make contacts with people and you can connect with them on Discord. Look, if YouTube shuts us down tomorrow, we're all connecting with each other in alternative platforms right now. And if BitChute suddenly becomes the next thing, we're going to be able to find each other because of BitChute.
But we want to grow. That's
here's
the
the thing.
problem. It's
Here's
not
the
a
thing.
matter
We've
of
already
just,
grown. We didn't know any of
One at
each
a
other
time.
5 years ago. Sorry. We didn't know any of each other 5 years ago. And now we do.
The issue is that people need to have a plan of escape. They need to have recognized primary alternatives so that you can ride the wheels on Facebook until the wheels fall off. You can ride the wheels on Facebook until the wheels of Facebook fall off. But the problem is when the wheels fall off, and if you're like Faith Goldie going like, hey, 99% of my income just disappeared because PayPal banned me. Well, was she expecting that? Was it just like, no sweat, we'd use Maker Support because Maker Support didn't get a write-off from Stripe. And now she doesn't have funding.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
the thing is that by all means, ride Facebook and YouTube until the wheels fall off. But the thing is, if you're not building an alternative that is robust, that everyone recognizes, people are going to go to after the wheels do fall off, you can end up with like all these people wondering what hit them when the wheels finally do fall off.
Yeah, here's the key. The thing that the real value of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter is that you can find people that weren't invested beforehand. Like myself, like 2-3 years ago, I didn't know anything about all these reactionary ideas until I started researching them. And I started researching them from kind of funneling my way in. And you find the bigger ones, you find the InfoWars, you find the Steven Crowders, and then you find the maybe Sargon Vakads, and then eventually you find the reactionary channels and the ones that we really want to get people to. That's the key, because if you just started a BitChute account, no one would ever find you. So YouTube is where you find your main audience. However, I'm convinced that eventually the wheels will fall off, but we need to ride them until the wheels fall off. But I do think that I think it's a good time right now to build up an alternative platform whilst you're still on YouTube, while you're still on Facebook. So when that does happen, you have you're prepared. Because I started a BitChute channel today. I'm going to start uploading my videos there and on YouTube, because I want to build up on BitChute so that when the YouTube wheels fall off, if they do, we'll have that up and running. And I think one good thing to take out of today is that possibly InfoWars being kicked off all these big platforms, it might push more traffic to things like BitChute and Gab.com, because Gab even tweeted that you can now find Alex Jones on their platform. I think BitChute said the same thing.
Yep.
I think that I don't want to just be vague. I want to be specific. I think that I think everyone needs to have a Gab account. I think people like us who are distant right and not alt-right need to come on to Gab in large enough numbers so that it's no longer just Twitter for racist people. We need to, I'm serious, right? And I don't mean to put down the alt, well, I do mean to put down the alt-right a little bit, but in a friendly way. Well, but the thing is that we need to, it needs to be the Gab.ai, I think, has proven itself to be the alternative. And I think that I'm afraid that there's no other way than to just have another alternative that's ready to go, and not like 4 alternatives. The 4 alternatives model just does not work, right?
I think the other important thing is with, say, Gab.ai, is that these alternatives can't be purely political, because then it does not attract anybody else.
Yeah, the normies.
It turns into an echo chamber.
Yeah, it does.
That's the real.
There is that problem, though.
That you went into conquest law.
Yeah, and I was going to say that is how. That's the other issue is with an alternative like Gab is how do you ensure that it's not going to just basically either it's not going to become infiltrated by the left and become a progressive platform, or they're not going to do a Brendan Ike and just find some way to shut down its right-wing leaders.
That's an excellent question, Fritz. And I don't think that we have an ability to ensure that for the time being. All we know is that if we stay in these platforms without an alternative, we will most certainly get killed when they go down. And so really, this is just the necessary move that needs to be made. Yeah. I think that the only thing we can hope for is that as I think, was it Granger who was bringing this up? If we could create spaces that were designed to be more ethical and more in line with our values in a communitarian sense.
Right.
Then,
well, I was thinking like a localized BitChute Facebook kind of thing, so that you couldn't find me if you live.
What does that mean, though?
Okay, so like well, I don't know about the programming aspect of it, but let's say it would be a community, but it would be centered around me. So if you didn't know somebody that I knew, you couldn't find me. It wouldn't be an open, flat universe where you could, like Facebook is, where you just find anybody and anything. It would be like, these are my friends, these are my family. It would be like a chain email, but like the next step.
I mean, yeah.
So basically, the search bar wouldn't allow you to see people who didn't know people you knew.
The difficulty, I mean, I'm not trying to shoot the idea down. I think it's a great idea, actually. I wish there wasn't a search bar on Facebook myself. But the difficulty is that 90% of friend requests come from people typing your name into the search bar and hitting +1 on your friend thing. And if you don't have that capacity, if you have to literally be, there's actually this system that open source computer programmers use, like this two-way encryption key, like public and private key exchange. That is like a super privacy insurance scheme that it might be good to look at in that regard, where the only way you can confirm identities is if you're right there and you can confirm that their private key is accurate or whatever. But that is that's something, I don't know. Once you get that paranoid about privacy, it will cut into your growth almost certainly.
Right.
But,
I mean, we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was not entirely fair. But before people go on and we finish this up with helpful suggestions, I have to read a super chat from Kiwi CH. I think it's Kiwi CH because he's sending me $50 New Zealand. Congrats, distributors. Just a wee wedding gift from me. I've got to run. We'll watch later. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. The donations are always really helpful to me in the project. But with that, let's just, we are coming up on an hour and I didn't want this to be too long since I'm super busy. So do people want to just maybe talk a little bit more about alternatives? I think we had some really good ideas on the floor here.
Well, I think we need to have a short run plan, medium run plan, and long run plan. The short run plan is, as we've been saying throughout the hangout, to ride the train till the wheels fall off, whatever. The medium run plan is to find another social platform like Gab, which isn't too hostile to our ideas yet. Long run would be to try and, through donations, set up some kind of nonprofit Facebook or even like a very small YouTube channel that I think should be, if we're trying to avoid conquest second law, should be explicitly of a right-wing traditionalist nature that would probably censor. Because I honestly think it's about time we try to, this is going to take a while for us to build up any kind of, this will take decades to build up any kind of social platform that would have any type of sway in the marketplace of ideas or whatever. But we need to start beating the progressives at their game of censorship, and we need to start building up our own platforms that then we can start censoring leftists so that they, don't try to take over our spaces, basically.
I mean, at this point, gab.ai is a good resource because we have, and I think this is one good thing that the alt-right has done. The fact that they started using gab.ai means that they were given certain assurances that there would not be censorship, because those guys really fear censorship and exposure. And I think that I think this is something we need to look into explicitly, but we need to make sure that those assurances are in some kind of, I know nothing is guaranteed in the long run by Conquest's second law, but we need to make sure that those assurances are in a certain way such that by the time we might see degradation, we're ready to build something of our own, or we can just take over the platform explicitly. And that's something that's definitely.
I just created a Gab account, and it literally just says, in its introduction, shows its first tweet is from Donald Trump.
Maybe this is a question for Ben McLean, but what would it take for me to create a sort of base level social network site and host it myself?
That's a question I've had too. Like, why hasn't like there are plenty of genius programmers in the world, and for not even political reasons, why haven't any of them been able to build up a sort of a social platform that
Well, there are tons of social
the biggest issue.
no, with the same amount of same amount of reach is what I'm trying to say.
The question I can try to answer it because I do have some experience in this realm. The same reach, but this is the whole difficulty, right? Because first of all, it's not inexpensive. The first thing you have to do is you have to create some kind of distributed platform that can accommodate millions of users. So you're going to have to go to something like Amazon Web Services where you can just buy up servers. And as the app expands, continually buy up server space and web space and processing power. So after you do that and you're taking on, a few $1,000s a month in terms of expenses for your servers, you have to make sure that people start using it to an enormous degree. And then you have to make sure that you're going to get some kind of income that's going to compensate you for all of these resources spent keeping the site up. It's not like a website. I mean, in some sense it is, but it will require a certain amount of space and servers in order to process people sharing things constantly.
What if I only wanted like 1,000 people max?
Well, I mean, you could create a blog that had 1,000 people talking on like a Discuss server, right?
Yeah, but could they have profile pics and share photos like you were talking about?
Well, sure. I mean, you can literally simulate this in Discord if you want to. You can set up your own server. And in Discord sort of works almost as if you had your own little social media microcosm.
Okay, so is there open source software out there that we could take? Because Discord has been accused of, well, Discord gets into all of your personal stuff. That's
the difficulty is there's open source software, there's open source APIs for creating this stuff. But the difficulty is not the APIs. The difficulty is the physical servers and the physical processing time. Like you literally have to have a server farm like waiting there. I mean, maybe not for 1,000 people, and if you just wanted to host 1,000 people,
right.
You could probably, like I said, you could probably upload, like you could create a PHP WordPress, you could use WordPress suite and create a little bit of a PHP server that would have a message board and it would be totally yours and you could upload it onto some web space hosting service without any problems and you'd be good to go with 1,000 people.
And I could invite all my friends on Facebook and say, we won't take your data and we won't.
For 1,000 people. For 1,000 people.
Right.
But that 1,000 people is not what we're talking about. We're talking about millions of people.
What if we could teach different people in different communities to do that? And so instead of one giant Facebook, you have
1,000 disconnected communities is not doing the job of social media.
But
so
maybe
I have a video, right? And I want to share it with the world, right? I post it to 1,000 strong community. First of all, most 1,000 strong communities don't get checked a lot, so immediately it doesn't get seen. But second of all, it can only go through 1,000 people.
But what if the job of social media isn't really a good thing for society?
We need it, question, okay, guys, we're not going to have there's not going to be any kind of dissident right movement without social media. It's the driving force.
Yeah.
And we need it to be a big platform because we need to get people that aren't already involved in it to find it. Because, I mean, that's how I found it. That's how I'm pretty sure 90% of people found it. The question is, how do we get people who aren't already involved into it? Because I mean, you could have like a Discord server with 1,000 people on it. The thing is that that's not going to grow a movement. When you need something that can grow, you need something that will bring more people in. That's the key.
And Granger, this is the thing. Like, you bring up an excellent question that we need to reform social media and social media uses so that it's more amenable to society and social cohesion. That is definitely something we need to do. But if we decide right now that social media maxes out at 1,000 person max, like if it maxes out at a single person's friend group, then we can essentially just nominate CNN and the rest of cable news as the ultimate arbiters of truth going forward, because we will be totally unable to challenge them in any meaningful capacity. If our reach maxes out at 1,000 disconnected servers that are totally uncoordinated.
Okay, well then here's a two-pronged approach.
Granger, let me just say one thing really quickly. I understand what your point is, but our point is not generally. Our point is that the genie is out of the bottle on the social media thing. Things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they exist now. And in some ways that is a good thing, and you're right also that in other ways it is a very bad thing. But the thing is that it's a thing now. So we have to work with the thing we got and not with the thing we wish we had.
I'm not okay. I agree. So how about a two-pronged approach? The anonymous YouTube, Facebook accounts where you try to attract more people for political reasons, and the real life me with my real life friends on the localized server option, so that
I don't
my
understand.
kids.
I don't understand what the localized server actually does for you. That's
Well, it keeps the narcissism at bay. It actually keeps the fake news
it
at
doesn't
bay.
do anything for you that you can't just do in your circle of friends.
Well, it provides a digital space for me to do that. Since
You've been able to make live journal accounts for 20 years now, so
so maybe I need to go do that.
I mean, if you want a live journal account where your five real life friends can post pictures, that's fine. But that's useless for the point of a political operation and political organization. And if people want to actually rival media companies, we can't just crawl in the shadows of Facebook and then redirect people to server farms of 1,000 people strong that are totally isolated from each other.
Is that website
organization?
Is that website called livejournal.com?
Well, I don't know. There's a thousand little mini spaces where you can get it. Like having a little space with 1,000 people on it, like with where they all kind of know you, is something that is Internet 1.0, been around since the late 90s. It's not
But
the power that people are afraid of.
What if we teach grandma to do it? Because she doesn't.
But what you don't understand is that grandma's going to have 5 1,000 servers that she's going to, checking back and forth between all 5 of them.
No, she'll just have one with her grandkids on it.
No, but then you don't know how social. I'm sorry, this is an incorrect view of how social relations work. Grandma's going to have like 10 grandkids, and they're not all going to have the same 1,000 person social groups. They're all going to have different ones, right? So if grandma wants to follow all of her grandchildren, she's going to have to follow like 6 or 7 of these servers. And guess what? Inside each of those servers, she's not going to have any idea who anyone is except the one grandchild who she's familiar with. That's the reason why these 1,000 like live journal sized platforms don't ultimately go anywhere when it comes to incorporating intergenerational interaction, which is what Mark Zuckerberg figured out in 2003 when he invented Facebook. So I'm sorry, I don't want to shoot down your idea brutally, but it's really important to understand why LiveJournal and why angelfire.com didn't take over the social media world in 1999. And they didn't take it over because people's social circles are rippling out like drops. They're not cohesive. We're not in the 19th century. We're not in little villages where everyone the Kevin Bacon effect is real, right? We're not consigned into separable 1,000 group bodies, right? We ripple out like a web. And because of that, ultimately expandable social media platforms, there's just no way around them. That's not saying they can't be reformed, but we have to understand that the expandability is core to their purpose.
The point is that we need to have a platform that we can reach out to people. It's not about just talking to people you know, because the thing is, like, you're going to need to get information out. Like, one thing that really got people red pilled was, and I think myself included, is back in 2015, in late 2015, with the migrant crisis and the terrorist attacks in France, just seeing the videos people posted on YouTube about them, and just how, and just like the reality of these things, as opposed to what the mainstream media was showing them. That was a huge turning point for a lot of people in actually being exposed to an alternative narrative. Because I myself remember back in 2015, when that Paris terrorist attack happened, I remember going on my Facebook wall and every single post was pro-Islam. It was all SJWs making excuses for Islam. And one of my first red pill moments was when I really kind of just got sick of apologies for a terrorist attack that had just happened. And that's what you're trying to do. That's the thing that you can change people's minds with. That's how you can change people's hearts. And that's how you red pill people. It needs to be a service that a normie will use. It needs to be one of those. That's where it's going to come from. And then it's good to expand into other ones, but that's where you need to start.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to be like, oh, well, I don't like grand jurors. I do like it. I think we do need to reform it for our own souls. But we can't be the only people who aren't playing a global game at this stage.
Right.
We have to think global. I mean, we have to act locally. But if we're the only person that does not have global coordination, we're dead. Because that also means we don't have money.
No, I appreciate the criticism. I think there might. I have to think more about it, but I think there might be a way forward because I don't
have. If I may interject, I think maybe like I agreed with the distributors here on this. I am thinking that this might just be able to be solved by having an alternative platform that just has an option or has part of it. You know, you can have the global public part of it, and then you can also sort of have your own cordon off area that you say, here are the people. Here's like my close circle of friends and family that I can just choose to share with them. But you still have the option to. It's just more of like a side option as opposed to its main purpose.
That's what Facebook was, but then I feel like that's what people are forgetting. Before Facebook did the timeline thing, you could actually chronologically look through everything that your friends had posted, and it sort of controlled the way that people posted too. Because I didn't share overtly obnoxious political things because I knew everybody was going to see it, and I didn't want to. There was a certain line. And I think it was reciprocal.
Obviously not these days.
Well, the other thing that happened is when the algorithm came in, it looked at how much traction each post was getting. So it literally turned everybody into a bunch of attention whores. So what kind of left-wing post gets the most traction? Well, the most radical one. So it made people worse, I think. I think it made people's online behavior worse.
Yeah, but what we're talking about though is getting a message out there. I mean, I'll admit to the vices of social media, but it's the game of the day, and we have to play it because this is our only chance.
Yeah, it's unavoidable.
If it's not for social media, the only thing people are watching is CNN, NBC, BuzzFeed, and all these other progressive outlets, and that will be what's seen as the truth. Social media is the only way we can get out.
If you want to know what your political media environment would look like outside of autonomous social media, just look at what the blue check marks are saying. That would be your American media without autonomous social media. And that's
right.
A problem.
Well, that's why I was saying a two-pronged approach. One where you stay in the public square, but two, one for your personal life where you disconnect from all the fake news. I mean, there's only so much of that you can take on a daily basis without going crazy.
Oh, sure. And maybe there's a solution somewhere there. I just, right now, I think the solution just needs to be coming up with some silver bullet alternatives and to try to move towards something like Internet Bill of Rights.
The other thing I would say is watch these Alex Jones fans very carefully because a lot of them are probably younger. A lot of them are probably tech savvy. The fact that they picked on Alex Jones, I mean, he could be the one to pioneer an alternative platform to make it legit.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping. I was hoping that that InfoWars going over to something like BitChute is what's going to make something like BitChute grow. That's what my hope is.
Anyway, let's perhaps wrap this up. Does anyone have any final thoughts on the matter? Final observations, things they'd like to talk about before we close down the chat and put a wrap on, or if people in the chat have any questions.
Before YouTube closes down us.
Yeah. Well, certainly. I think, we all have to be prepared for this. And, one thing I will say is that multi-uploaders are a must. I'm surprised they don't exist more prominently. I'd love to have some link for a few good ones because that would be something that would really help out content creators like myself. Uploading it and just being able to click a box and then being able to upload it also and get in BitChute would be a huge time saver for me.
Maybe we need to make some open source software for that.
It exists. It's just, the problem is that the social media sites have an incentive not to cooperate with it.
Well, couldn't it work on your phone though? Primarily, couldn't it just manhandle your phone to open your app to then post on the different?
I think that Gab actually has an option that you can post what you post on Gab automatically to Twitter.
Oh, that might be good.
Twitter and Facebook used to be able to be linked up.
Yeah, because what you want is you want your you ideally what you want is your Twitter and your Gabs to be linked, and hopefully your YouTube and your BitChute. And I'm pretty sure this will happen eventually, because Gab and BitChute have to know that this is an opportunity for them. That when you upload it to that one site, it automatically posts it to the other site. So you kind of don't have to manage the two. You just you can stay with your main one, but you got your backup. That's kind of what you want.
And plus, I mean, you could easily write a simple Python script to go over to Twitter, download the tweets of a favorite Twitter personality, and then just re-upload them onto Gab. That's I mean, you know, I'm not a web programmer, and I can do that in an hour or two. So anyway, any additional thoughts?
Am I allowed to make a political endorsement?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I live in the state of Michigan. Tomorrow is the primary for the Republicans and the Democrats, and I'd like to encourage anyone who may be listening who lives in Michigan to vote for Patrick Colbeck in the gubernatorial primary. He has a real shot at, and he's been calling out the Muslims, and the one who has a connection to the Muslim Brotherhood who's running for governor on the Democrat side, and he's got some real good solutions for different things.
Oh, go ahead.
And Right to Life in this Republican Senate race, Right to Life has endorsed John James, not Sandy Pensler. So,
well, my endorsement is, if you're in Toronto, vote for Faith Goldie come October.
This is the most political endorsements on a channel for somebody who does by principle not vote. But anyway, I think we can pretty much shut it down since we've gotten off topic. I don't see any questions. I did see Benedict the 17th comment on the whole liberalism thing, and I did remind myself that I was going to do a live stream on the subject of liberalism at some point with him. But I
heard a good mind with him.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I don't think I've had a chance to watch it yet, but it looks fun.
Well, I got into a Twitter argument with him over the last 24 hours, so he doesn't like me very much.
Well, I know Benedict. I'm sure he's very friendly with all of you guys. Anyway, I'll just say we were a little bit over time, but thank you for showing up and discussing this issue. I think it's going to be really important going forward, and have a wonderful night.
Mm-hmm.